Hey everyone, welcome to the Great Grow Along 2024. My name is Ryan McEnaney and I am joined by Skye Hamilton. I'm so very excited. Welcome to Grow the Happiest Hydrangeas. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, and I am so excited to be able to talk about it with someone else and not just talk at you. So, thanks for coming along on the ride with us today. It's going to be a ton of fun. We'll get to answer a lot of the common questions that we get, share some of our favorite varieties. So let's dive in a little bit. Just to give you a little background, as I said, my name is Ryan McEnaney, and I work for a company called Bailey Nurseries. We're a wholesale grower, so we're based in Minnesota, but have locations all across the country. And we grow all the plants before they come to the garden center where you buy them. And outside of our wholesale growing operation, we own a few consumer brands, one of which you might have heard of called Endless Summer Hydrangeas. We also own First Editions, Shrubs, and Trees, and a brand of roses called Easy Elegance Roses. So I am very privileged and grateful to work on the marketing and PR for the brands and for Bailey, as well as serve as our spokesperson. So get to come do fun stuff like this and talk about hydrangeas and learn with all of you and hopefully give some really fun, good information so that you can have success. With that, I am so excited to be with the Hydrangea Queen herself to talk about this with you today. Thank you so much for coming along with us, Skye.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for having me. Like, I can't tell you how excited. When I got that call, I was like, absolutely. Like, someone wants to talk hydrangeas with me, sign me up any day, anytime. Let's do it. And yeah, when I found out it was going to be you, I was like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, someone who loves them and is obsessed with them just as much as I am. So I'm so happy to be here and to be talking with you about my favorite subject.
Well, and we both get a ton of hydrangea questions all the time. And so to be able to like share that, and I bet we get a lot of the same questions, and to go back and forth is going to be really, really exciting. So maybe start, can you tell us like maybe your top one or two questions that you get all the time?
Absolutely. So it's funny. So when we were first talking about what we wanted to talk about on here, what are the questions that we get asked the most and what are the most common misconceptions? And we both agreed the most common misconception is that hydrangea is just a word that is across the board. And in fact, there are actually six different types of hydrangeas, six varieties, four really main ones, and then you can kind of dive in a little bit more. So I think, understanding that each variety has a little bit different um, growing needs and water needs and light needs. And just like once you understand that part of it, you can, I mean, the world is your oyster as far as hydrangeas go. So I think, knowing the varieties and then the difference between old and new wood. So let's, we'll put that on the back burner, but I think we should definitely dive into the different varieties because I think that is really the most common, the hardy versus, the non-hardy hydrangeas and just knowing what you have and how to take care of them. I think that is the key ingredient to all of it. So I guess actually should say knowing your growing zone is really a big one because it absolutely goes into each one of these varieties because each variety has a different growing zone, that it'll do well in. So I think yeah, just the
Well,
different varieties, the old versus new, and understanding your growing zone, you'll be golden after that.
yeah, and we were talking about this before too, that especially with the USDA zone changes, understanding like what is the place that you are gardening in. The USDA zones are like a good starting point, but
Yeah,
they're trying to help us understand the whole country. But like my zone four, which I guess now I'm zone five, I'm in Minnesota, is very different than a Colorado zone four and five. And so
absolutely.
understanding like elevation, precipitation, all those things impact your what you're able to grow.
Yeah,
And you're spot on with like the old and new and what might be a little more cold tolerant than others is really important to ultimately make sure that you have success because like I always say if you want a green shrub, you buy a green shrub. You don't buy a hydrangea to be a green shrub. So
right.
We want to
Right.
help you have success and maximize the blooms.
Yes, because everybody wants blooms. Why isn't my hydrangea blooming is probably the number one question that we probably both get asked. And that is absolutely like the answer to that question has everything to do with what variety you have and is that, correct for your growing zone and your climate. Because also like you were talking about, climates and growing zones are a little bit different. So you can fudge what you can grow depending on your climate, depending on if it's a humid climate, a coastal climate, all of those have a little bit different kind of what you can fudge the hydrangea that you're growing in that climate. So yeah.
So you mentioned that there's like 6 main species. We have 4 up here.
Yeah.
We're gonna touch on the others sort of as we go through too, but really this is the most common that you're gonna find in a garden center. So we figured let's start here and help, sort of work your way through. So smooth, oakleaf, panicle, and bigleaf are really the ones that you're gonna find most of in the garden center. So should we start with one that's North American native species with smooth hydrangea, one I
Good.
know that's near and dear to your heart?
Oh, so yes. Yeah. My favorite. They really are my absolute favorite. Um, because I'm in a high desert climate, it gets really cold here in the winter, and these are just reliable bloomers. I there's almost nothing you can do. I never tell people to cut back a hydrangea all the way to the ground, but if you were to cut a hydrangea all the way to the ground, this is the one that you could do it and just be totally fine with. So yeah, this is I love my smooth hydrangeas.
And it's so interesting that you say that too, because we hear that all the time. Like, oh, I just go cut my Annabelle hydrangea back to the ground in the winter. And like, that's fine. You can because it blooms on the current season's growth. But it's super interesting. There was just a study that was done by the Mount Cuba Center in New Jersey that looked at this. And we've actually done some studies here as well to see like, is that really the best practice? Because, sometimes when you get a lot of rain or wind, this species can go boop and fall to the ground
Yes.
because it has a lot of that green new growth and doesn't typically form the woodier stems like some of the other species do.
Right.
But that's because we cut them back so often. And
Right.
so what they found was that not only did it impact the sturdiness of the stems, but also the size of the flower head too. So if you haven't yet, go check out all you viewers today. Go check out that research at Mount Cuba. It's really super interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome. I tell people all the time, the deeper you cut, the bigger your blooms, but you won't have as many blooms. And so it's kind of a balance between those heavy heads that, yeah, when they get wet, phew, they're going to be dropped to the ground because you haven't given them that base. So, um, I like to support mine with boxwoods in front of them with a lot of them, or growing them through a peony ring is another one that if I don't have anything else that supports them or around it, I do like growing them through the peony ring just to give it that extra oomph because man, when we get a rainstorm, these are like the
Yeah.
first to go down because like you said, they don't have that structural integrity that a lot of the more woody hydrangeas do. But it is nice when someone says, oh, my husband chopped it all down or my landscaper chopped it all down. I was like, well, you were in luck because this is
Yeah.
actually one that's going to come back for you versus some others. They are definitely more water heavy. I have to keep mine on a drip system where I live. I water it between 1 and 3 times a day, depending on the time of the year, just because we have consistently over 100-degree days in our summers. And so it gets pretty hot and we have zero humidity. So, um, unlike something like a panicle hydrangea, this is one, that they can be fairly drought tolerant, especially after it's been established. This is one that really does need a decent amount of water. So if water is a concern for you, I know a lot of places around the country, water really is a concern. This might not be, unless you live in a more coastal area, this might not be the one that you'd go for.
Yeah. And in a place like Minnesota, for me, or the upper Midwest, where we typically in most seasons get a fair amount of rainfall, we have really good humidity. This is again a species that's native to certain parts of North America and a kind of a woodland plant. And so like for us, we can plant it in full sun, but also can get a little more dappled shade. And so, especially if you're looking for something that can tolerate a little more shade and get blooms, this is one that could work for you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say deep shade necessarily, unless you want
Yeah.
that green plant, but it
Right.
can tolerate more shade than some of the others.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've talked about with smooth hydrangeas is like, if you're just starting with hydrangeas and you're nervous, like, how am I going to do this and get blooms? This is a great starter plant.
Yes, yes. This is what is known as a hardy hydrangea, which means, we'll talk about it a little bit later, the old wood versus new wood, but it doesn't have the buds over the winter that, can be chopped down or get a freeze. So because the buds come in in the spring, you're going to have blooms. Yeah, if you have it in too much shade, you might not get as many or as big, but this is a very reliable bloomer. I've never once had a smooth hydrangea that didn't at least give me a few blooms, even in a lot of shade. And where I live, which is right on the border of zone 6, 7, because of the new zoning, we're technically 7, but it just depends on the year. It's so crazy. Sometimes we have mild winters, sometimes they're very harsh. So this is one that I really like to have morning and afternoon sun. But once it hits like 5 o'clock, it needs shade or else it will absolutely fry in our sun. So I would say if you are above zone 5, it really does need that late afternoon shade. It can take some afternoon sun, but that hottest part of the day, evening sun, this is not one that can take that. Now, if you live in zone, lower 6 and 5 under, this is a full sun hydrangea. You can have this just out there looking beautiful, which I think is fabulous. Another thing that I would say about this is for front yard landscaping, if you're not somebody that likes the winter interest of having, kind of the brown balls. This is one that you can cut back and be totally fine and tuck it behind a different bush. And it's fabulous. A lot of other hydrangeas, you can't really do that with. And so a lot of people put them either in the back if they don't like to look at the winter dry stems. But this is a great one if you just kind of want to hide it in the winter.
Well, you said that this is a hardy hydrangea, and it's true. This is zone 3. You're good to go. And like you mentioned, in warmer climates, it can brown out later in the season, especially if it's getting too much sun.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about some others that are really good in those warmer climates. This is really sort of like that middle of the country north. This is where you're going to see a lot of them. But it's beautiful. And Annabelle is one that has been around since the 60s, I think, is when it was introduced. It's like classic and like that beautiful like snowball type bloom that is just big and beautiful,
Yeah.
great in the landscape, great in cut arrangements. I know that you use a lot of them. Do you have any best practices for smooth hydrangeas and cut flowers?
Yeah, as far as cutting goes, I always say do it early in the morning. When they're just like their absolute freshest. I like to cut it and dip it in alum powder, which is a pickling spice, and so it really gives a lot of longevity to that bloom. I just literally stick it right in a little cup of alum and then put it in the water, and they last, oh my gosh, so long. I think something that people don't realize is that they think it's going to be white for a really long time because they kind of start green and then they turn white and then they actually turn green again after a couple of weeks, depending on your heat. The hotter it is, the more drought you have, it's going to turn green faster. The longer cool season that you have, you're going to have white for a lot longer. But I actually absolutely adore the green color. I think it is absolutely beautiful. These on the screen are my Incredible, which is an Annabelle hybrid, after it's turned green, and they just have the most beautiful color for so long. They go green, this really, really bright chartreuse green, and then they turn kind of a light, almost sage green, And then depending on where you live, mine turn gold, which I absolutely love.
Cool.
Before they go fully brown for the winter, they are the most gorgeous gold color in the fall that I like, next to the pumpkins and the corn. I can't get enough of it. So yeah, these are just my all-time favorite.
Love that. Well, and you also with Incredible are like not only Queen of Hydrangeas, but Queen of Hydrangea hedges,
Ah,
right? I
you
mean, it's
just can't beat
stunning.
an incredible hedge. Like, I mean, look at that. It's just so quintessentially hydrangea. And what's funny is people ask me all the time, they're like, "You're in Idaho?" Like, I would not have thought hydrangeas in Idaho, but I'm like, well, you're thinking, more coastal hydrangeas, macrophylla hydrangeas. And if you want that same look, but in more of a desert climate or a cold climate, this is the way to go. Like, I wish that I could live, in the Hamptons and have the blue hydrangeas everywhere, but that's not going to happen for me in Idaho. So to get a very similar look is the Incredible Hydrangea, which is, like I said before, it is a hybrid off of an Annabelle. So stems, bigger blooms, because one of the problems that people did have with just your regular Annabelles is not very strong stems. And the second, a wind came or rain and they would just be on the ground. These ones, I'm not saying that they won't be on the ground if you have a really heavy rain, but they can take a lot more and they really do get big and tall and pretty strong, especially if you give them a really good prune that gives them, a decent base to work off of from the last year. So, as far as making it into a hedge, because I do get this question a lot, I say take, whatever the width of the tag, what the width of the tag says. So on this one, it's like 4 feet, 5 feet. And I say take off 1 to 1.5 feet off of each side when planting. So I generally plant them between 36 and 42 inches apart on center when it comes to Incredibles. But that is pretty much across the board. Whenever you're making a hedge, I just say take a foot to a foot and a half off of each side of what the tag mature width says, and you will have a great full hydrangea hedge.
One I love too, you mentioned this earlier, that having the boxwood in front. So if we do have like some really extreme rainfall, especially after a dry period when the hydrangeas are maybe a little bit stressed already, you're at least giving them like a pillow to lay on. And then
Yes.
hopefully, because then that stem's not going to get too weak and bent over as they dry out, they can pop back up into that head shape a little bit better.
I'm always surprised. Sometimes I'll really baby them and I'll go out and I'll kind of shake the water off the heads like a mommy that's just, oh no, but honestly they pop up so well. I'm always really surprised once they hit the ground. It's pretty hard, but you're right, like it gives them this like pillow cushion to kind of stay on, and then they pop right back up and it's fabulous.
Well, and if you don't have the space for like a big 4 or 5 foot hedge, there are some other ones that have been introduced that are a little bit smaller, like
Wow.
Wee White, which is fabulous. It's got that beautiful white flower, then blushes later in the season, continues to put out those new blooms. So it's just another one that like if you like that idea, but just have like that much space, or you want to
Yeah.
put something in a deco pot, this is another great one that you can plop into that smaller spot.
Oh, it's fabulous because I think there's nothing that makes a landscape more beautiful than layers. And whether you make the hydrangea the back layer, the middle layer, or like in this case, sort of the front layer, I- it just adds so much like beauty, depth, and dimension to have those blooms just all the time. And with a smooth hydrangea, you are going to have it. Here, ours start blooming like they're in full bloom by 4th of July. I'm in, 6, 7, so we're a little bit later, but then I have it until it's fully snowed on it, and then I'll cut off the heads or whatever. But just it's an amazing amount of longevity between, of the season of blooms.
Yeah, they're beautiful. And white is sort of like the classic, but there's also some color that is starting to appear. Mini Mauvette is another beautiful one. Again, another one that's a little bit smaller, but that beautiful like mauve colored hedge is just spectacular. Also great for cut arrangements. It's just another one of my faves.
Such a great one for, especially for cut, because as it turns into late summer, fall, they really deepen in color, and that's they dry so beautifully. I do have a couple of the mini Mauvette, and they're some of my absolute favorite fall cutting dried hydrangeas to use in all sorts of, because you in the fall you want those really deep beautiful colors, and this is absolutely perfect for that. So you've got like sort of the bright pink early on, and then it turns into just a beautiful deep fall color. So I love it.
Well, and for people that love hydrangeas like we do, to be able to extend it and have 4 seasons of hydrangeas is even
Yeah.
better. The dried are amazing. Okay, so that smooth hydrangea we love. Now, Oakleaf is a different one. This is one where, like, when I show people, like, they don't always know that it's a hydrangea, but the look of it is given away a little bit by the name. And this picture is for if you ever get to New York City, Madison Square Park, which, like, you know, the Friends building that they show
Wow.
at the opening, this is right next to it. It's
Oh my God.
amazing. And one of the, so it's a park within New York City, but one of the categories of plants that they have that they've built full collections, like hundreds of, are hydrangeas. So if you get to New York, go to Madison Square Park. This is right on the corner. This big, beautiful quercifolia or Oakleaf hydrangea sort of towering over the fence line. So it's absolutely beautiful. Most of them do not bloom in my zone 4 garden, but I know that you have some experience with Oakleaf at home too.
Yeah, I have. They actually do fantastic for me. Even though they do bloom on old wood, they have a lot more winter hardiness than some of the others, and so I don't have to cover it. It just it blooms amazing. I'm again, I'm right on that border, and I also am right on a river, so I have a tiny little microclimate. So, but honestly, I feel like just in general, they do very well here, and they're some of the earliest bloomers, which I absolutely love. I think one of
Mm.
the most amazing things when talking about the different hydrangea varieties is that there is a variety that blooms at every stage of the summer, going all the way through the end of fall. So depending on where you live, you know, you can start something like an oak leaf or a big leaf, and that'll bloom super early, and then you can have a smooth, and then you go panicle. So you just have like an array of blooms the entire season. And this one, yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. They come in a bunch of different colors, which I absolutely love. The foliage is out of this world. Just so pretty. That like actual oak leaf is great. And I don't think, I mean, all of mine have the most amazing fall color on the foliage. I mean, it almost makes it worth it to grow it just for the fall foliage colors. I know you can see it on the screen there. Some of them, you know, are like very orange and red, and just it's like a beautiful oak tree in a small form. And they do have a lot of different sizes on these as well. But this is definitely not a variety that I would suggest if you like very manicured look. These are a very hands-off variety. So like these are not ones that you go prune to make a nice ball. These are let it go wild, let it be what it's going to be. Sometimes that's very drapey, sometimes it goes straight up, but this is just a very wild and gorgeous look. Definitely not one for your most manicured lawn, though.
Yeah, and this is another one kind of like smooth. It's also a species that's native to North America, native to the woodlands of the Southeast. And so again, another one that can tolerate a little bit more shade, great
Yes.
for like the edge of a border, especially if you've got some mature trees. But yeah, it is a little bit more of a wild look. There are some, this is Jetstream that is on the screen that we've been looking at, and it's a little bit denser, and so it can support itself into a little bit more of a consistent structure. But you're right, some of them, like the one we showed from New York, gets huge and sort of drapes over the fence. Some are coming down a little bit more in size, but really, we grow this. I have it in my garden, and it's not bloomed once because it's not hardy, bud hardy in Minnesota, but I don't care because the
Yeah.
foliage is so cool on it. So if you can have a really amazing foliage plant with that fall color and then the bonus of the hydrangea blooms, it's
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
spot on. It's so
Totally.
cool.
And
And that
oh,
native plant is great for the ecological systems. You can see
absolutely.
on some of them where that bloom is a little looser, helps for pollinators as well because it's not as tight. You can get into that fertile flower. It's
Wow.
just it's so spectacular, and I get zone envy every time someone has a blooming one in their yard.
Oh, and I love that there are so many different types of blooms on the oak leaf. You have, like kind of the more lace cap look. Some are just very long and slender, but then you can get ones that almost look like a mop head. I have one called Gadsby that it's almost a ball shape. And I was so surprised because when I thought, oak leaf hydrangeas, I kind of thought either sort of a lacy or a long, almost panicle look. But this one is very, very ball shaped and it's absolutely beautiful. They pink, white, just gorgeous different colors.
Well, and so like you can see on this one, on the bottom part of the screen, that's where how this one starts, and then we called this one jet stream because as the season progresses, that color, kind of like a panicle hydrangea, will get red as it goes up. But there's
So
also
fun.
some varieties that have double flowers, and it's just like this explosion of hydrangea petals. They're so beautiful. So I love. So if you're in
So
a place
beautiful.
that can grow panicle or grow, excuse me, oak leaf hydrangeas, do it because they're so good, especially if you got the space for it.
Well, and I think another thing that there's sort of this misconception that hydrangeas are a shade plant. And in actuality, most of them need a decent amount of sun. An oak leaf needs at least 4 hours of sun or dappled
Yep.
shade. But if you do have a space that is more shaded and you do want a hydrangea, this would be, as long as it's warm enough in your climate, this is definitely a good one for shade. It will actually thrive in that versus a lot of the other hydrangeas won't bloom as well for you, but this one is actually going to do very well in the shade.
So should we go to the opposite end of the spectrum and talk about full sun? So, the for a long time, like the smooth hydrangea, has been so popular. The big leaf hydrangea, which we're going to end with, has just exploded. But the one that's really growing so fast in our gardens is panicle hydrangeas, which are these beautiful cone-shaped flowers. And this is another one, kind of like we talked about with smooth, where it's like if you need a starter hydrangea that you can rely on and don't have to worry if you accidentally cut it back or whatever, that's going to still give you flowers. Panicle
Yeah.
are so great. And there's so many wonderful new varieties that you can have different sizes and shapes and bloom
Yeah.
colors and fall color. It's just so fun. So this is one of my favorite sort of like foolproof hydrangea species.
Me too, 100%. Like, especially living in a warmer climate, a dry climate, these are the most drought tolerant of any of the hydrangeas. You do need to water it that first year, but once it gets established, it takes far and away less water than any other hydrangea that I have. Um, they also are confidence builders, I feel like if you can grow this, you will know that you can grow anything. It'll teach you, that once you master the pruning techniques and all, this is like your gateway drug as far as hydrangeas go. Like once you plant this, you're going to be gone because you'll just fall in love with the color, the structure, the bloom size, the fall color. I mean, this is the one that's going to get you into it. And like you said, they have, the size is so different. I mean, they have ones that are 15 feet tall by 10 feet wide. And then you've got little hotties that are what, 3 feet by 3 feet that are just covered in blooms. You can't even see a piece of foliage on it because the blooms are so dense and beautiful. Oh, speaking of little hottie, this
Got
is
you.
one of my all-time favorite hydrangeas. Just, they're just incredible. I mean, the amount of blooms on one little bush is insane, and you can just stick them out anywhere in a landscape, and they just add like a beautiful pop. That the white, I mean, I can't say it. I don't know. What do you think
Oh,
about
I love to show, and like this is very a production like nursery picture to show. But the reason that I like to talk about this one, where you can see it in that the field production, is when we're growing it in a field like that, we don't care what the top looks like. All we're trying to do is put on roots.
Sure.
And if we don't care about the top, we're not like watering it to make sure that the top stays nice and white. If we don't care about that and it's still what it looks like, that is an amazing
Yeah.
plant. And
Yeah.
the picture next to it is in our trial garden where we have drip irrigation, but that's it. We do no winter protection, no wind protection, no extra fertilizer or anything. That's what is produced. It's like, to me, that's such an exciting new introduction. And like you said, this one's a little bit more compact. And so you can see that that top picture on the right, that's a plant that's been in the ground for 6 years. And it's only like maybe hip height on me. And I am not a tall man. And so, like, it truly will stay compact, which is something that sometimes we struggle with panicle hydrangeas
Yeah.
because, like, from a breeder and introducer's perspective, like, it's really hard to guess because plants take a really long time to mature sometimes.
Yeah.
And so to know that we went through the years of trialing and it still stay that small, and we've introduced the plant a few years ago and it still is like that, that it can stay that really compact size, makes us feel comfortable. Like, if you want to plant it in the foundation and have that like beautiful hydrangea hedge under your windows, it's not in 5 years going to all of a sudden cover your windows and then have to go dig out this really woody shrub.
Right. I think, yeah, no, all of those things, 1,000%. I remember, I don't, it must have been on Instagram, but I saw it coming out, and oh, I was so excited. I put it like, I emailed my nursery. I was like, is this one coming? I feel like I need this in my life. Like, I need a little hottie in my life. So, I mean, I was like first in line to get one. And so I think that was what, 2, 3 years ago. And oh my gosh, it's just amazing. The strength of the stems as well. Because I think one thing, that we do have concerns about as far as panicle hydrangeas is a lot of times the blooms get so heavy that if you don't prune correctly, they really do fall to the ground. That has never been an issue. I don't barely prune it. I just go in and deadhead and that's it. And I just leave it. And the next year it's just fully bloomed again. So
Well,
this is
in
like a set
that
it and
like
forget it.
the heavy stem or the heavy blooms and the stem strength is something like, as a breeder of plants again, that's really important to us. And we have gone through a few different introductions recently where that's been one of the reasons we introduced it. Berry white is another one, also the fall color, because look at that. It so that like a lot of panicle hydrangeas, or all panicle hydrangeas, they start white and then they can change that color in fall as the nighttime temperatures cool down. And
Yeah.
really that's what does it. So if you live in a really warm climate where your nighttime and your daytime temperatures don't get more than 15-20 degrees difference, you're not going to get as rich of color. But Berry White is one that has incredible fall color. The fall picture here is from my cell phone. Like, it's not Photoshop. That's just what it looks like from my iPhone. But you can also see how strong the stems are. And again, this isn't our trial area where we don't do anything special. We just want to see, are they going to go like that? Because the flower heads are that big.
Oh
And
yeah.
the pruning on this is important. It's not like you're not going to get flowers, but to have that stem strength, we say at least a third. You can go back by a half, because not only will that help with developing bigger, stronger stems, but also increases branching, which is going to get you even more flowers.
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
you prune in your yard with panicles?
So my whole thing with panicles is cultivating that strong skeletal structure inside, because I think that, I mean, really, because that is a very common question that I get. Like my panicle hydrangeas that get so heavy that the blooms, flop over. And I'm like, well, and then they say, oh, well, I cut them back really hard because I want bigger blooms. And I'm like, cutting them back really hard is counterintuitive. Like keeping the strongest, thickest stems in the center, and as much as you can going up and out versus going out and down, that is what's going to keep them growing that way. So basically, yes, I take it back by 1/3, but not only do I take it back by 1/3, I also go in and I take out anything smaller than the width of a pencil. That's my sort of
That's great.
If it's a very, if it's a new planting and everything's smaller than the width of a pencil, no. But I'm talking about when it's an established shrub, a year or two old, go in, take out anything that's wonky, because I don't know what it is with Panicle Hydrangea, but sometimes you get the wonkiest stems going through and all sorts of crazy. And I'm like, no, you want it to like really have, keep saying skeletal structure, but like when you look at it with nothing on it, no blooms, no leaves, it should have really, really good structure to it, because that is what, when it's covered, that's what's going to give it that very like uniform look, and all of the blooms being strong and up.
Yeah.
And then when the rain comes and the wind comes, they're just going to stay up, which is great.
Yeah, and you don't want those crossing stems on the inside because then they can start rubbing against each other, which can not only expose that for disease, but it can cause that stem or those blooms to die, and then you have that like weird gap in it. And so doing
Yeah.
that cleanup late winter, really depends on where you are, but late winter-ish before they start to develop those flower or the leaf buds and flower buds for the season. Really, can you see what you're working with a little bit better? But since this does flower on the current season's growth, you just don't want to do it too late in the season when that flower bud might be starting to develop.
Right. Yeah. I actually, because we do have fairly heavy snow here, in the like early winter, I will, once it's under 32 degrees at night, like consistently, I'll go in and just deadhead. I know they're so beautiful. I'm like, that's such a pretty look. Like I absolutely love the look of the snow on it, but I've lost too many branches due to the weight of the snow. I don't know what it is, but we just get really heavy snow, and I've lost whole chunks out of my limelight trees and out of other panicles. And so I go and I take off those heads just to not, I just don't want to have to worry about losing it under snow weight, even though they are so pretty. But then after I do that, I just leave them alone until late winter, and then I'll go in and do a really good, prune for that structure. But I do like to take off those heads. So I would say, if you do live somewhere that gets heavy snow, that is something to think about. If you don't get much snow, oh my gosh, there is almost nothing prettier for winter interest than a panicle hydrangea. Like I really do wish that I could do that. And I've tried, and I'm like, this year I'm just gonna leave a few, and then get a whole chunk broken off. I'm like, oh dang it, that just wrecked everything.
Yeah,
But
if you get like that lovely hallmark snow that's just coming down and will beautifully decorate the blooms, fabulous. But it
yeah,
is that really heavy, wet snow can take out that whole branch, and then again you get
yeah,
that wonky, weird open area, and like that's no fun either.
no, no,
So the one that I'm showing right now, I just want to quickly mention this one's called
yeah,
White Diamonds. It's just a little bit different panicle, where most are like that really tight cone shape. This opens it up a little bit. So if your design style is a little more natural, this might be one that's interesting for you. But
yeah.
one thing that you did mention that I want to make sure we talk about is hydrangea trees and your beautiful puppy. So I love that we can take these panicle hydrangeas and put them in tree form. I love doing them in big planters like you've got. They're great in the landscape. But what are your like best practices or tips on, especially like we get a lot of questions around pruning panicle hydrangea trees. How do you get them to look so dang beautiful?
So it's definitely all about the prune, keeping that structure, unlike like a bush where you kind of want everything to go up. I really do try to keep a ball shape in the structure, so that there are really decently thick branches going in all directions in that ball shape, because once it grows out like this, there's not a whole lot you can do. Like it is going to be a little bit more on the like pokey side with the panicle hydrangea, but if you can keep sort of a uniform ball shape with the thickest branches, that's really the best way. Um, and then these are pretty big. I want to say these are 4 years old in this picture, and I still have bamboo stakes next to them just because it is in an area that gets a lot of wind, and they're so top heavy. It's not really an issue during the year, but once the blooms come and they're so heavy, I do like having that kind of support system next to it just to be on the safe side. I would not want to lose, you know, I would
Especially
not want to cover
during a
them.
season like that. You want to make sure
Yeah.
that
Yeah. And I love having an underplanting underneath it. I think it really just does add a lot. One thing I should say, um, on these particular planters, they don't have a bottom, so they can keep going down. But if you have a decent sized planter, I have seen them do phenomenal in planters. And because they are hardy, you don't have to worry so much about the cold. I don't know if I would do them in a full planter like under zone 5, but above that, they actually do very well in planters.
they're beautiful. So should we talk about the one where we get all the questions? The
Yeah.
Bigleaf Hydrangea macrophylla. This
Yes.
is where we get to talk finally about old wood, new wood. So we get tons of questions, especially with endless summer. How do we get the most blooms possible?
Yeah.
So I before we talk about old wood, new wood, sun exposure, again a little bit site dependent, but at least morning sun and dappled afternoon shade. Zone 4 or 5, especially with newer varieties, I can get away with full sun here. Um, the way that we talk about fertilizer, this is the one where like we want to pay attention, especially there using a bloom booster. Like I equate everything to food and drinks. And so for me, I think about it like as the green leaves start to emerge, it's like a cup of coffee. Give it the fertilizer, follow your package instructions. And if you have a reblooming hydrangea macrophylla or big leaf hydrangea, again in like late June, early July, for us, like a Red Bull to like get us through the afternoon. Same thing for the hydrangeas, giving them a little extra energy to put out those blooms the rest of the season. Does that seem right to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think know thyself, like if you're one that thinks about it and goes out and fertilizes, like you don't have to fertilize. Like I don't think I've seen a single hydrangea that wouldn't bloom because it wasn't fertilized, but it's just like why have it if you don't want the most blooms possible? So I always suggest at least one, in early spring once you start seeing the green coming out, that's going to give you the first boost, and then like you said, like in the heat of summer. I really like to do a second one, but I do it on all my hydrangeas, just because that gives it like the feed to keep going into the fall. And I have noticed that one year I forgot to do my summer fertilization, and I did feel like things started to kind of droop a little bit, like it got browner sooner. It just didn't have the feed going into the fall. And that happened to be sort of a long, mild fall. And you just never know, depending on the year, what it's going to be. And so giving it that boost to keep going, that's invaluable. So really, if you're going to have it, like do it, but it's not like fertilization is going to not get you blooms. It just helps so tremendously. So yeah, it's like you said, like nutrition, coffee, like that thing that's going to get you going. But one thing that I always say is do not fertilize after July, because what you don't want to do is have them be pushing out a bunch of new growth. Like I say, it's like giving a kid a soda before you put them to bed. Like that's not what you want. You want them to start calming down, not ramping up. So yeah, as far as fertilizing, I do twice a year. But if you can at least get that first one in, you're better than 90%. So yeah.
Well, and so then the biggest questions around this is pruning. We say never do a hard prune, and like never with an asterisk. Like sometimes you're doing pruning to shape, or you planted one that you didn't realize was going to get a little bit bigger. You just have to know that if you're going to do a hard prune, you're going to probably sacrifice some blooms. But because these have the ability to, some of them at least, bloom on old growth and new growth, if you so taking a step back, if you're hydrangea, you've got like a more classic big leaf hydrangea, Cape Cod type, it probably only blooms on last year's growth. And those buds aren't super cold hardy. So if you're in a zone 4 or 5 like I am, those buds are probably going to die over the winter.
Yeah.
And if it's not a rebloomer, you're just not going to get flowers the next season. So you can see here what it looks like when we say old or new wood. You can see like the woody stem on the bottom. That's last season's growth. And then the green is the current season's growth. So
Right.
the remontant or reblooming hydrangeas have the ability to do both, which is going to hopefully get you the most flowers throughout the season. And you can even
Yes.
see on here, like as spring starts to wake up, these ones are a little slower. So that's why that fertilizer at the beginning of the season helps. It's like they just need a little extra push. And so you can see the green coming from the base, and then you start to see those green buds start to open. And that's where you can see that old wood, where hopefully you still have some blooms that survived the winter to give you that first set of flowers before that rebloom later in the season.
Yeah. I think it's funny. I talk about this a decent amount with people because I feel like it's just a concept that people have a really hard time with, especially when they look at a panicle hydrangea or a smooth hydrangea and they're like, well, this is old wood. And so I always say, I like to say old buds versus new buds. So so hydrangeas that bloom on the old wood, they form their buds in the late summer, early fall. And then those buds, by the time the spring comes around that they bloom, they're old because they have gone the entire winter season. And I call them the old buds. Whereas the smooth hydrangeas and the panicle hydrangeas, they don't have buds over the winter. So they don't form their buds until the spring. So then they're new. So they bloom off of those new buds. So just because you see wood on the panicle hydrangea or the smooth hydrangea, that's not what's considered old wood. Like that's not what it's blooming off of. It's blooming off of the new buds or the old buds. So these big leaf hydrangeas that have had those buds over the winter, that is why they're not considered hardy hydrangeas because you have to, they have to make it through an entire winter season. That's snow, wind, cold, all of the things. And depending on where you live, it might not be the easiest or best for you. So it's so great that when I think about hybridization of the old versus new, I think of Endless Summers because that was really the first hydrangea that you could come out and have a winter kill of those old buds and then still get new growth that comes, yeah, a little bit later, but at least you're going to get it. Whereas, like you were talking about the Cape Cod hydrangeas, if you got an early frost and it killed those buds, you were done for the season. You're just gonna have a beautiful green bush with no blooms. So it's amazing just the leaps that we have come, in the plants that we have now with the hybridization of the big leaf hydrangeas so that they're a little bit colder, hardy, and you do get those reblooming, which is just amazing, especially for people in slightly lower growing zones that may not be able to do it otherwise.
Well, and that's one of been the really big focuses of for Endless Summer. We're celebrating 20 years this year. And so we talk a lot with people about, if they have Endless Summer the original and maybe didn't get as many blooms because those buds maybe weren't as cold hardy as some of the newer ones, or it's sited maybe not in exactly the right spot because we've learned a lot. Think about it like cars. Like you might still drive a Honda Accord that you also drove 20 years ago, but the new version has better safety features, has better gas mileage. Same thing with hydrangeas and bud hardiness, that cold tolerance is something that we've really worked on. And so newer varieties like Summer Crush like this, those old wood buds are just hardier than some of the older versions of the big leaf hydrangea. And so that does allow us to have some of those old wood buds, even in zone 4 and 5, that can survive the winter and come back and give you that early set of flowers in addition to the late season. Bloomstruck is another really great example of it. That old bud hardiness over
Yeah.
the winter months is
Yeah.
great. And, like, snow cover is awesome. We love a lot of snow because it's like a blanket for the winter, but it's the wind when you don't have snow cover that really causes a lot of problems. And that's where
Yeah.
the buds get zapped either over the winter or when we have a nasty spring.
Right. Yeah, something that I do, I'm zone 6, but because we do have fairly harsh winters and the wind is terrible, the wind chill and cold is honestly worse. If we had more snow, sometimes I think it might even be better. But with those original endless summers, I actually do cover them for the winter. I put some chicken wire around it. I fill it with leaves and then I put a frost cover over it. Do I suggest that for everybody? Probably not. I just happen to love them so much and I really want those blue, tall, gorgeous mop head hydrangeas. So I'm willing to put in the work. I know a lot of people aren't, but I also, those are an older variety. So I have a lot more of the new hybrids that I don't have to do that with, which I absolutely, it's fantastic that there are those new varieties that you don't have to do that with. I do tell people, even with, the fact that they bloom on old and new, they primarily bloom on old. So that's your first flush. So if you want that first flush, that is something that you might want to protect. If you're fine with having it be the second flush on the new wood, that's going to be a little bit later in the season.
And the one that we introduced, and we've got to get some to you because we don't have them yet, is the Pop Star Hydrangea.
Oh,
And this is
so
the one that we've seen that is the fastest to rebloom. So like the rebloom is really important, but especially for if we have winter kill, we need it to rebloom faster so that we're not waiting until September. And so Pop Star is the one for us that we've seen in all of our trialing that can do it twice as fast as everything else we've trialed. And so even if you do have it die back in the winter, those old buds die, at least we're not waiting till September. We can still get these in July. And we've seen they rebloom so much and so fast that they will like that because it old and new, it will like new flowers will come out in between the other existing flowers. So this one we're super excited about. It just came out last year, so still people are getting a little used to it. But also I think this one's important for us to talk about because it's a lace cap. And when we
yes.
think of bigleaf hydrangea, usually we think of like the colorful small snowballs compared to the big white ones for the smooth. But lace caps are fabulous, adding texture to the landscape, additional color, great, better for pollinators because they've got again that fertile floret in the flower on the inside where they can access the pollen. That's really, really important.
So beautiful. I think something we definitely need to touch on, because I think this is also a common misconception, is changing the color of hydrangeas. People think that you can change the color of any hydrangea, and that's not the case. So, one thing that is amazing about, the big leaf macrophylla hydrangea is the fact that you can change the color depending on the pH of the soil. I'm sure you know a lot more about that than I do, but yeah,
Yeah,
do you talk about?
yeah. So, and unless you're like at a really neutral, like 6.5 pH, it takes time. So this isn't going to happen overnight. But if you've got alkaline soil or a higher pH, you're naturally going to get a pink or a red color depending on the variety. This one right here is called Summer Crush. If you've got acidic soil, so lower than 6, and the presence of aluminum, which typically they go kind of hand in hand, you're going to get that blue or purple. So that classic Cape Cod color is an acidic soil. If you've got alkaline soil like we have here in Minnesota, you're going to get that pink color. And this is true across the bigleaf hydrangea. Even there's white ones like Blushing Bride that is a white flower, but it blushes blue or pink depending on the soil. So again, whatever you have naturally, embrace it, live with it, unless you want to do a little extra work. But if you're like, I naturally have pink and I really want that blue or purple, add some soil acidifier. Vice versa, if you want to go from blue to pink, add some garden lime. And just have an understanding, you can do a soil test either from a garden center or extension program, figure out what your pH is now, and that'll give you an idea like, am I going to see this change over a season or is it going to take a couple of seasons?
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And just so everyone watching knows, like, you can't change the color of a panicle hydrangea, a smooth hydrangea, and oakleaf. They are what they're going to be. Now, do they change as they age? Absolutely. And most of them, like the smooth start white, then they turn green. The panicles start white and turn pink or mauve, but these are the ones that you can actually change um,
Yep.
over time, like you're saying. So I think that is something I get a lot. Like, why can I change it, or why is my smooth hydrangea turning from white to green? And that's just like the natural aging.
So before we wrap up, I have to talk about something special that's exciting and new this year. This is Eclipse bigleaf hydrangea. It's brand new. This is the first purple leaf hydrangea that exists that will stay this really beautiful, rich, deep purple, like almost black color. And so we think about it maybe a little bit differently than we would a traditional big leaf hydrangea, which is one of the reasons that we put it into first editions and not endless summer. It does have that reblooming trait, but it's a little bit more dramatic. And you might plant this in a hedge, but you probably will put it something like this where it's a little bit more of a focal point to really show off that beautiful foliage and that what we call the cranberry color. But like we were just talking about, it also has the ability to change color. And so this is what we call amethyst. And the picture on your right, you can see Eclipse planted next to Endless Summer in our production field, just to see how really dramatically different that foliage is. So we're super excited about this. This is the first time that people are hearing about it, and you'll be able to find it in garden centers this spring. But you treat it like any other big leaf hydrangea, but because it's got that really deep leaf color, it can tolerate a little bit more sun. Even in our growing facilities out in this field right here, it's just outside Portland, Oregon, zone 7, full sun all day. So
Wow,
really, really excited. It's just going to have a really fun, unique new place in the landscape.
that's amazing. What a showstopper.
Mhm.
Very cool.
Really, really exciting.
Well,
Well,
actually, that kind of takes me into something that I wanted to ask you about.
yeah,
So, I mean, I know you and I have talked about like the gift hydrangea, the forest hydrangea versus, the real, like the true endless summer, the macrophylla. Um, the difference between a real, like what you've brought to market, what a nursery goes through, to really bring these hydrangeas to market that are different, that are like more hardy, that you've really put a lot of like time and effort into. When someone buys this and they plant it in the ground, you've taken so much of the guesswork out of it to begin with. Can you just like talk about really quickly, what you guys do, as far as trialing, as far as like how you bring something like the Eclipse to market? Like, what are the things that you guys do for that? It's so interesting to me as a consumer.
at a 10,000 foot level, thinking about something like Eclipse, introduced in 2024, the original seedling is from 2016. So it takes us a really long time to say that's something really unique and different. And so we might start with 100,000 unique seedlings every year and get that down to a few that maybe we are going to continue to trial. And so we want to see, can we replicate that? So like with Eclipse, can we replicate that dark purple foliage, or is it going to turn green like most of them do? So we take that, we do a lot of testing on site at our breeding farm in Athens, Georgia. As we get closer to making a determination like, yep, this could be something we introduce, then we put it into production trials. And not only can we replicate it in the breeding program, but can we then produce 100 of them? Can we produce 1,000 of them? And all along the way, is it disease resistant? Does it have that reblooming power? Is it keeping that dark foliage? And is it relatively easy to grow? Because it might be the coolest plant of all time, but if a grower can't grow it, it's never going to make it to a garden center. So it has to check all these boxes along the way. Then we test it in Minnesota. Can it survive a zone 4 winter? We test it in Oregon. Can it survive the humidity of their fall, their summer and fall? We give it to our other growers around the country. They do their own testing. We work with universities around the country. They do their own testing. And like, is it going to perform like we hope? And then we have to start building numbers, and we have to take one plant and turn it into hundreds of thousands, and then get the nursery, the garden center industry really excited about it. All that before we then get to tell media about it. Then we get to bring it to garden centers and start distributing it all around the country. So it's a really long process, but it's so fun. So I hope that someday we'll get to come back to Great Grow Along and talk a little bit more about that process and be able to show people even more behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And I think actually you touched on something that I would love to just do a little snippet. Your local nursery, your local garden center, I'm not talking big box stores, although you can get amazing things at big box stores, but the amount of information that you can get at your local nursery is invaluable. They will, especially when it comes to hydrangeas that are very climate specific as to what, will really succeed. Invaluable information at those local nurseries. They know what they're, they get to choose what they grow. They, order every year what they know what does well and what to order, what doesn't do well, what they don't want to order. So if you have any questions like that, like talk to your local garden center. They're going to know climate specific to your area what you're going to have, the highest rate of success. Like just because an endless summer does amazing in Oregon zone 7 on the coast does not necessarily mean in the mountains of Colorado it's going to be your best choice. But if you go to that garden center and they're like, hey, you know what, a panicle is exactly what you need, or a smooth is exactly what you need, the companies have done the research for you. They have given you the best chance, but you really need to think local as far as what is actually going to have the best success for you. That once you get that down, then the next one is just going to get easier and easier. So I always say, like, talk local first. And before, you might see something on Instagram that looks amazing that just won't do well for you, and then it'll crush your spirit that it didn't bloom, or whatever. So definitely, like, think local.
I absolutely agree. And like we said, my zone 4 or 5 is very different than Colorado zone 5. We can grow Bigleaf Hydrangea here. It's not that great in Colorado. And so going with something else, and that's why we wanted to go through these main species today, because they're not a one size fit all. So once you get to learn what works in your area, that's what's going to get you the most success and maximize your blooms.
Absolutely, because we want you to love hydrangeas like we love hydrangeas. And so, like, we want to give you that, like, best form of success to do that. And that is growing zone, and knowing which variety is going to work the best for you.
Well, we hope you all had a lot of fun today and learned a lot. Please do stay in touch with us. All of our social handles are there. You can just scan the QR code on the screen. We love to hear from you. We love to answer questions. We love to see what you're doing in your garden and get inspired by you too. So please do reach out to us and stay in touch. And
Yeah,
thank
we
you,
love
Skye,
it.
all of the really great information that you had today too. It's so fun to be able to chat with you. So
Love it.
thank you.
You too.